So I'm starting again. And someone has asked in the chat, let me find it, hang on. Asked this question about, is labour giving birth like a phenomenon where workers are now starting to look for more and more workers' jobs in a country with abundant labour resources? Labour phenomenon. Now, this issue of reproductive labour, which I think is really interesting, is there a bit in Marx, in Capital, but not developed, and there in his notebooks more. The question of the labour, the costs of training a new generation of labourers is a cost that comes out of the wages given the workers. The workers have to look after their own training, their own skill. And discussion of this was hinted at by Marx a few times, the cost to the family, and I guess also to the community, because it takes a village to raise a child, so to speak. But he doesn't say what has been said by some of the Italian feminists and by Camille Barbagallo, that the labour of giving birth is also labour. In English, the word is labour, which is why I was asking about what the Tingviet word was. Okay. Now, the people involved here are Silvia Federici and scholars like that. Her books are just really being brought out in English by PM Press and things. This is really interesting. And they talk exactly about this, the labour of reproduction, but it comes out of a 70s debate about whether or not the reproductive work of maintaining the worker's household should be paid, right? Wages for housework campaign. And this upset some socialists who said, no, women want to monetize everything. You can't do that. I don't know why someone like David Harvey criticized that, saying the grounds on which David Harvey, no, not David Hobby, David Harvey, that's better. The grounds on which he criticized it were not wanting to monetize everything, but so many services in the home are anyway being monetized, right? So like cooking, home, cooking, hairdressing, cutting your hair, childcare, cleaning, they're all monetized already. So the logic of wages for housework was sound, but it was also just a political challenge to Marxist focus only on labor as labor in the factory, rather than all the other kinds of labor that were done largely by women who were not considered then part of the workforce. They are now more, but not 100%. And that somehow childcare was easy. Or wasn't really work. It was just staying at home watching daytime telly or something like that. You know, cliches, stereotypes, and it is hard. I can tell from, as everyone has been reminded that in Vietnam, for example, the work of grandparents was, a lot of grandparents were doing the childcare, right? And COVID has reminded everyone of how much work that was. If the grandparents are not easily brought into your household now, suddenly the parents have a lot of extra work to do. And of course you can't have a job and do childcare. Look at how Google has mentioned, I mentioned COVID and suddenly it pops up, get the latest information. Stop that. Anyway. Yeah, that's the issue. And that's why I was interested in what was the Tingviet word for giving birth, because that is a metaphor of labor in English. They're going into labor, but it's also, as in Camille Barbagallo's writing, interesting writer coming up now, Coming up now is she explicitly talks about birthing new forms of capital, new workers for capital. Right? The translation stopped, hasn't it? Well, I'm going to go back anyway to the. I'm going to go back anyway to the PowerPoint in a minute. So anyway, that's an interlude talking about Engels, but I was wanting to talk about Marx's notes on the East India Company, right, and which was Burton's employer originally, and the East India Company was, I guess, the first global corporation. Actually, no, I wasn't going to do that next, was I? I was next. I was going to talk about the course guide. All right, let me save the East India Company stuff for a bit later. I'll just say one thing about them. That I went to have a look myself at the East India Company booty. So this is the moment with the British East India Trading Company got the control of Bengal, the richest part of India at the time, the richest part of the world. Maybe 25% of world manufacturing was happening in Bengal, and England in 1757. 1764 they really got control, but in Clive defeated Siraj-ud-Dowlah in 1757, 56, 57. Calcutta was stormed by Siraj-ud-Dowlah, and Clive, in revenge, came and defeated him and kicked out the French from India to take control of Bengal's economy. And that made Clive super rich. It made the English colonialists able to massively profit from their colonization of India and bring back to England massive resources. I mean, that's why they went to South Asia, to India, because there was massive money there, resources, right? I mean, they always also tried to come to Vietnam. They were looking for somewhere. They had some base in Madras in India, and they were starting to trade to China in Hong Kong, and they needed a spot halfway between India and Hong Kong to a port or a shelter for their ships on the way to resupply and so on. And they looked first at various places, Bencoolen in Sumatra, but then they landed on Kondau, and they settled a factory in Kondau in 1700. Now, Kondau, of course, its subsequent history as the place of the French and American prison, right? And it's almost like sacred spot for Vo Thi Sao and the history of the Communist Party and so on. Before this, like before all that French prison stuff, there was the British occupation of Kondau, and they settled a factory, and quite a lot of ships stopped there on the way to China. I mean, it didn't last for long. But actually, first of all, William Dampier, a captain, sometime pirate, had stopped in on Kondau, and also went up to Hanoi, or what is now Hanoi, and other British East India Company captains had stopped in Hoi An and tried to set up trade. A man called Bowyer tried to set up a factory there, but it was really only with Captain Catchpole that the British set up a factory and a refueling point or resupply point on Kondau in 1702. It's mentioned in the museum, but there's not much history. There's not the site of the monument is there, but you don't see anything in the tour guides and so on yet, because it only really lasted for 3 years. Because the Wing Kings, and maybe with the help of the Khmer and the Makassi employees of the British, their indentured labourer, they rose up and slaughtered them. Catchpole and 30 or so English, all but one survivor, were killed, and the British were got rid of from that settlement. And so eventually the British needed this site somewhere between India and China to refuel, and they tried Penang for a while, but then they got Singapore, and they settled for Singapore. And Singapore had become the super famous economic powerhouse of Southeast Asia. It was nearly Condau, right? Interesting, because it has a good harbour and so on. And now is a tourist resort and a place for domestic tourism around the former prison and so on. Worth visiting. Anyway, the East India Company we're talking about, and I went to have a look for myself, in a way, the slogan of the course, at the place Powis Castle, which is what Clive bought with his money. I mean, he brought all this wealth back to England. He bought a castle, he bought himself a lordship, but he also, and many others who got rich in India, invested that money. And that was what all the money coming from colonial adventures of England, and for the Spanish in South America, for Spanish capital, and for the Dutch in Southeast Asia with the spice trade, all that money that came to Europe kick-started the Industrial Revolution. Right, so it was very important that this money came back, but so much of it came back as treasure. And you could go and have a look in the Welsh countryside at this Powis Castle, and I went for a look at that myself, because there's more artifacts and treasure there than even in the British Museum. And this is the castle. You can go by train and then a taxi and then a walk for half an hour through the grounds, some beautiful grounds to see this castle. And inside the place of this Lord Clive, who Marx called the robber baron, right? And in those notebooks of Marx, he talks about how Clive had caused the black hole of Calcutta and had killed himself with opium, and was a suicide eventually, given that he had traded in opium while he was in India. But he brought back such riches, and so much booty is there in the castle. I'll skip over the text. I mean, not just from India, but also stolen from or taken from all over Europe. Collected, a word for taken. But the India room is so fascinating. There's so many gold treasures there, and collection of spears and suits and armor and jewel encrusted swords and daggers and so on. They're all the heritage of India kept in a Welsh castle, right? And not sent back to India. Has some quite good museums nowadays in Delhi and in Calcutta, and perfectly good museums that could look after this stuff, but it was taken by the colonialists and remains more stuff in this castle than even the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert Museum, and they too should, of course, give back the stuff. They kept it in this beautiful vitrine, some of it, and there's a few other rooms, and it's all sorts of things as well. Like another image that I've got rushing ahead is Tipu Sultan, the ruler of India, of southern India anyway, the warrior Tipu Sultan, his slippers, gold encrusted slippers that Lady Clive, Lord Clive's daughter-in-law, collected in her tour. She collected a lot of stuff, a massive amount of stuff in a 6-month tour of southern India, in an entourage of like a couple of hundred people with 5 elephants and how many camels and horses and so on, just gathering up all the artifacts and heritage that she could and bringing them back to England. This stuff has to be given back, right? I mean, in the same way that Vietnam has lots of artifacts in France, in French museums, like in Toulouse, the Cham Culture Museum there. This stuff should be sent back to the countries that it's from, because they have good museums, can look after them. The museum here in Ho Chi Minh City, the History Museum, is perfectly good. Just been recently renovated. Its music section. Anyway, by the way, I was going to look at the course guide. I better do that because we're going to run out of time. Let me do that. We could get into big debates about heritage and the repatriation of heritage materials. Now I have to start a new PowerPoint and course outline. Here we go. So it's not super fast and yet my skills on Google Meet, but here we go. So this is the course guide, course outline, right? And some general information. So I'll put this on the e-learning, right? So the course is 302.113. There's some course objectives. It's weird that I have outline and course objectives. So there's an outline of the course. I'm going to help you read your way into basic knowledge about anthropological approaches to culture and its methodologies. Hopefully to advance your enthusiasm for reading in anthropology and anthropological perspectives, and cover a variety of topics that are, about practicing anthropology. There are several traditions in anthropology. It's course objective number 2, and we're going to enter into discussion of several of those. The main aim is to develop a critical approach to questions about knowledge and culture, wherever human life is found. So I'm going to be asking you to think critically about your assumptions and other people's assumptions, and what is the basis on which we know culture, and consider how cultural upbringing shapes understanding of the world and how that might require rethinking. Now, there are some learning outcomes. Actually, I find this a little bit strange at the beginning of the course to talk about the outcomes, because really we should only talk about outcomes at the end, right? These are aspirational. This is what we hope will be the outcomes, but we don't know in advance. So let's see what the discussion produces. But I can generally say I hope it will be we get to know and understand concepts of culture, anthropology, ethnography, interpretation, to remember some of the key approaches and the key methods. Really, I'm asking you to remember one thing. Anthropology can really be discussed as go and have a look for yourself. All right, that's the one thing you have to remember. That's, of course, complicated. It's not simply that you can go and have a look for yourself. You have to prepare. You have to have your eyes open in a certain way. You have to be ready open to new experiences, to be ready to change your mind, to have your mind blown, whatever. But basically, go and have a look for yourself. Don't listen to me. But to analyze and evaluate and interpret. Okay. All right, so sorry, I got kicked out for a bit there. I don't know why. Wow, sorry about that. So we lost the connection, but I'm back. Don't even know why that happened, and even what I can do to get back my train of thought. I was talking about outcomes, wasn't I? We're looking at the course guide, and I need to put. Oh, the recording is still going. Amazing. Okay, good. If that happens again, folks, just talk amongst yourselves about what's going on. You can learn from each other a lot, I'm sure, and you need to discuss all these things. Anyway, outcomes in advance. The issue that's really important is the course content, okay? So what we're going to do week by week. We have the key themes of the course we're going to go through, and look from we're doing it already. Start with the Victorians, look through 20th century innovations in fieldwork and ethnographic critique and ethical debates in the wake of so-called post-colonialism. I say so-called because we're not in a we're not after colonialism, it's still going on. Right up to 21st century digital culture and visual anthropology and so on. Debates about how we research and understand culture are the key, right? Researching social life as culture and understanding the patterns or the knowledge we have about culture. So the first week is what we've been doing, anthropological selves, how the anthropological researcher's self-image changes across the history of the discipline and how its European origins in the Victorian era involved a number of assumptions. And we look at Louis Henry Morgan, Edmund Bernard Tyler, James Fraser, Richard Burton, Marx, and the East India Company. Next week, and the reading for next week is already on the e-learning site. And next week is about fieldwork. So if you would read this text by Michael Young, What Did Malinowski Eat in Papua? Papua New Guinea is where he went to do his fieldwork. We'll talk about what fieldwork is, and look at Malinowski, who's the modern anthropologist. 1922 was his book, very important book, and that's next week's work. So you just read Michael Young's thing about what he ate. It's a good way to get into talking about Malinowski. Week 3 is looking at French anthropology, actually. The French Dakar Djibouti mission, they went from the west coast of Africa in Senegal and traveled across the center of African continent to the east side in like the 1930s. And Michel Leray, the surrealist, an anthropologist friend of George Bataille, and written about, interestingly, by Michael Taussig, contemporary anthropologist in New York, is how we get into looking at this. Although the text for this is by one of my PhD students, actually Carrie Clanton, Beyond Ethnographic Surrealism. Using surrealist techniques to understand anthropology was something that James Clifford introduced. Well, he didn't introduce it, he commented on it. But the surrealism anthropology connection is strong. And it's interesting to look at that because surrealism is an art form. And Carrie takes her investigation, her own field work was to look at, because anthropologists are always interested in ghosts, right? So Carrie was looking at a group of people, her subject was people who hunt for ghosts using electronic sound devices and so on. So she talks about the history of anthropology, but also talks about her practice of ghost hunting. It was pretty good read. And Michel Leray and Taussig is always interesting. The fourth week looks at, go back to politics, I suppose, Fieldwork and War, although we won't actually have left that. The Surrealists and War is Fieldwork and War. The involvement of anthropologists in the Second World War was significant and discipline shaping in some way. Although not just that war, I want to also talk about anthropologists involved in the American War, the Vietnam War, as they called it. But here, right, in the 1960s, the CIA used anthropology as a kind of way to get up into the highland. Well, they pretended to be anthropologists, or they used anthropologists' work. In fact, one anthropologist, where's his book? That I have down here somewhere. Can't see it now, but it's called We Eat the Forest. Was carried. That book was carried by U.S. soldiers into the field, into battle, like anthropology textbook, as a guide to. Anyway, war and anthropology is the theme there. So we're going to get into looking at that, fieldwork and war. Then again, a French anthropologist looking at Claude Levy Strauss. Levi Strauss was an amazing scholar. He died a few years ago. It's 101 years old when he died. But in 1955, he wrote a book about his travels in South America called Tris Tropiques. And if you read just one book in anthropology in your life, it should be this one. Tris Tropiques. Do you know what Tris Tropiques? How's your French? What that means? Anyone? Triste, so is tragic or sad. Cui, crying. The crying tropical lands, or the sad tropics. But not just that, the tragedy of the tropics. And it's a book where he kind of laments the influence of the West on the rest of the world and his own role in it, actually. And it's really beautifully written. I can quote the first lines. It starts off the first sentence. It says, "I hate travelers and I hate explorations, but here I am about to tell you the story of my travels and exploring over however many years in South Africa, looking to try and meet and then bringing home, sanctifying the journey by bringing home slides and images of where you've been on your holidays, like holiday snaps, something like that. Anyway, it's a really great book. I'm sure it's translated into Tingviet, but I haven't found a copy yet. Some of his other books already have. I've got them, but not yet. Tris Tropiques, but that's the one to read. If you read one, of course, I hope you read more than one. Tris Tropiques. Then we look at John Gledhill's work and ethnography as an issue, specifically the practice of anthropologists as a writing practice. Making knowledge of others as a writing practice became a big theme in the 70s, and it was important. John Gledhill's work on anthropology and colonialism is a good context for that. The next week, on ethical anthropology, especially the Code of Ethics of the American Anthropological Association, which is shaped by that involvement of the CIA in anthropology in Vietnam, actually. It caused big ruckus back in America, and they introduced ethical guidelines because of that. Around this time, it's the first week of November, so I'm not sure which week. There'll be a week inserted where we don't have a class. That's the midterm. And the midterm for your assessment, we'll talk about that a bit more, of course. It's going to be like writing an essay plan. Right? So I'll talk about the assessment at the end as well. But it's not an essay as such, but the exercise of writing a detailed plan for your research essay for your final. Then we look at week 8, the next section, New anthropologies: digital, environmental, geopolitical, or autonomous, development of collective anthropology or anarchist anthropology. And reading Malcolm Crick, who's my teacher. He also died more than 10 years ago now. But he was very interesting, famous for saying that anthropologists were a bit like tourists. Which people hated that, of course. They thought they were much more serious. But his critical take on that was provocative. His work is very interesting. New anthropologies. Then a week on visual anthropology, on filmmaking and anthropology. I wish we were spending more than 1 week on this. I taught the master's degree in visual anthropology at Goldsmiths University of London for more than 10 years. So I could talk about this a lot. There's a huge lot of material about how anthropology reinvented itself from the 1980s to do visual and digital photography and film-based anthropology. And that's really interesting as a new style of doing anthro. Then in week 10, participatory anthropology and workplace inquiry method, which comes out of Italian autonomous Marxism, actually. A kind of way of doing collective anthropology. And I want to spend some time on that, actually, for the next 3 weeks. Then for the end of the course, developing your own project to do anthropology where you are, right? Malcolm Crick, my teacher, he used to say, you can do anthropology wherever you are just by opening the door. Opening the back door, you can see people doing stuff, and you can talk about, even if it was your backyard, there could be an anthropology of the backyard or the corridor or whatever. Just look around yourself at your desk and what's there, and start to interpret what culture you're involved in. Like, for example, right now, my desk here is covered in a whole lot of things like this, whatever, kids toys and crayons and pencils and stuff that you do when you're doing homeschooling, right? Because that's what I'm doing with my kids. And an anthropologist looking at this will then talk about the culture of homeschool, of quarantine, how it's changed our life, and so on. And maybe that could become a research project. I'm not saying that that's what you should do, your own desk, but you could write about your own desk or your own house or your own street or your own city or something. That's what we'll develop in the last section of the course and for your final project. Will be to write a kind of piece of research which will be an anthropology of your context. It could be anything, really. There's so many potentials, and we'll talk about that, and we'll even do some feedback rehearsal and stuff, presentation around that. And I'm sure it can be fun and a bit different to writing a conventional, boring school essay. I'm introducing that because actually to avoid the problem of getting, in past versions of the course, some people have given me just Tingbia Wikipedia pages translated as if they were a student essay, and that's plagiarism. And I'm so against plagiarism because not only is it you cheating yourself, if you plagiarize, you're cheating yourself because you're not doing education, but you're also risking the reputation of our university and in fact me, because if like a newspaper or something got hold of the story that Tondo Tongue students do not write their own essays, we'd be doomed. So in order to do that, I make very specific tasks that can't be found anywhere else, and we'll have fun doing that. In my other courses, we do things like, and later you'll find if you do other courses with me, we make a newspaper or we make a zine, other experiments. Anyway, that's by the by. What else do you need to know? You need to be able to contact me, so you do that via email. My email is easy to find, johnhutnyk@tdt.edu.vn. Let me see if there's anything more in this outline that we need. Oh, I mentioned some key texts. Okay, so Malinowski's 1922 text, if you're going to read another book, Argonauts of the Western Pacific, it's really unavoidable, especially, well, at least the introduction. I'll make this available digitally for you to look at, although it's better to own a copy if you can. Big fat book, expensive, don't steal it if you can. As I said, Claude Levy Strauss's book, Tris Tropiques. I'm not sure I have a digital copy, pretty sure I do have. I'll make that available. Another one is Michael Tausig's book, Law in a Lawless Land, which I put in as a possible background reading for you because it's an anthropology of being in lockdown, basically. He was under curfew. I mean, it's 2002, he wrote this, in Colombia when the right-wing paramilitary were forced to lockdown. So it's a diary of that period. He wrote the diary while he was in lockdown, and then he rewrote some of it actually in my kitchen in London, and made this fantastic little book. It's well worth a read. A good example of what anthropology can be nowadays. Let me stop this one, and what I want to do is show you what the assessment, isn't it? So not that. I think it's this one. Let's see. I can't see the screen. It's so small when they give me options to choose. Yeah, this is the Word document that tells me this assessment. So you have three things. One is your process score, I suppose, and that'll be done from your participation online, having your camera on and so on. And also some small exercises that I will set for you, some homework tasks. There won't be that many, 4 or 5 and so on. And you get 30% there. 20% for the essay plan that we'll do for around the time of midterm. And that's the developing the project for the final. And the final, which is worth 50%, is your report. More like an essay, and we'll structure it very carefully and have several rehearsals beforehand. As I said, I'll set aside a few weeks to do that at the end. So pretty straightforward. I'm generally not a hard marker, so you'll be okay. If you don't plagiarize, because you get 0 if you plagiarize, copy anything and you're dead meat. And if you turn up, should be fine. Participate, ask questions, get involved, and everything works well. Contacting me more, you can find all these details and everything on the e-learning site. Right, we've got a special site for our course. It's here. That's the link that you use to enter this room. You will find, after I do this sync with Google Drive, so you can see it. When I do that after today, in a couple of hours, I'll click on there, and then this page will be populated with the recordings of these sessions. They come up a little bit. They take a while to appear, but they do appear there. And you have, right, a week-by-week guide in this column here. You see the welcome is there. Oh, there's announcements. So you click on this, you'll see announcements. There's only one topic. I'm trying to work out now how to add a topic so that you can comment. But I tried that with the other classes and they weren't able to comment yet. So maybe I have to change the settings somehow. So I don't want that to be a discussion board, but there's a welcome at present. See what the welcome says? Nothing new. Gives you a link to my book, right? Okay. You can reply. Can someone try and reply to this? See if that works. So I can reply, but can you? Anyone? For some reason, I think the dialogue doesn't let you reply to it. Just make a comment saying, I don't know, boo on that, if someone could. You just not understand or what? Can someone click this sign where it says reply? Anyone on this? And try and reply? I'm not sure that you can, but the system should let you do so. If it doesn't, I need to change something. Well, I'm going to run out of time if we don't do it soon. I mean, I can reply, look, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But somebody else? Can you reply to that? Don't have the chance. You should be able to. I don't know why. I've got to change that. I'm going to investigate that and try and fix it for next week. Anyway, that's that page. Announcements, general. All right, so this is the general page, has a weekly guide. You see this week is filled in. This is what we've just been doing, the welcome and the first lecture, anthropological cells and origins, Victorian anthropology, the reference to the Burton text, so the reading. This is next week's one on fieldwork and Malinowski, and there's the reading here for you to do. Michael Young, What Did You Eat in Papua? You click on that and you find it. Let's see that it works. Not found. Haha. How to go back? Click on that one. Not found. Don't know why it's not showing, but I'm going to fix that in a few minutes too. Okay. And you see there's all the other weeks. We also have one holiday. I can't remember what holiday it is, 7th of October, which means we go until the 6th of January. And 4th of November is midterm. You can sleep in. I haven't populated these weeks yet, but I will. I'll do that this weekend, I hope. So you'll get a good idea. But it's the document that I just showed you, the week-by-week guide. I'm just going to cut and paste and put that in, but with all the reading, okay? What else is on this page that you need to see? I don't think there's much else. I want there to be a place where we can put references and other readings or even photographs and so on, like there was in the last year in the Google Stream. But if we can't do it here, if I can't fix this announcements discussion page, I'll set up a separate blog for the course. Now you can also look at blogs of mine. All right, so I have one called Trinketization, and I'll make links for these too, where I put things of interest to me, basically. You'll see it's got stuff on music, history, on political campaigns, on Bandung, on my holidays, on archives about Japan and Vietnam, for example. And it goes back a long time, right? I've been running this blog for, let's see, said what, when? Since 2005, so 16 years of stuff. There's a lot of information here. You can spend far too long looking at all sorts of junk. And there's another one called Capital NCTU WordPress. I'll put the link on for that as well. And that's the site which has my lectures. All right, that also goes back only to June 2011, but it has my courses on capital, course on mass media, my anthropology course on critical thinking, and other courses I've done in Taiwan, in Japan. I taught in Taiwan for a year, I taught 2 years. I taught in Japan twice, India, Turkey, Germany, England, and Australia. And all those things. And also there's stuff there on my publication and my research. So like recent publications, more than enough for you to read, that's for sure. You can also find me, you know, on all the usual things like Facebook and Zalo and WhatsApp, but email is probably the best. I might reply sometimes really late. Like I sleep funny hours because I've got kids, right? And they wake up. I sometimes reply. Don't be too shocked if I reply at 2 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't mean that I've been awake all that time. I just might have got up. But that's the best way to communicate with me. I would say don't use the e-learning email because it's not very convenient. Use the TDT one. If anyone has any questions, ask me anytime. I'm going to fix right now the connection to the reading for next week because I don't know why that's broken in this one. It was working in the other one, but that will take just a couple of minutes as soon as I finish and before this afternoon's class. Yeah. Thank you for participating today. Let me stop the presentation and do one more click for the record. It's such a good picture. Let me get rid of that. Do it again. Not everyone has their camera on, I notice. Should have. Okay. I know it's better for your bandwidth sometimes to not have it on, but yeah, I want to get as many people onto my list as possible. Again, I say, if you have any, I'm going to stop the recording. If you have any question, just ask at any time. Now is good.